Hello, my name is Rebecca Griffin, and today I'm going to be talking about psychological distress in parents of autistic children. This topic is especially relevant to social work because we often work directly with families who are navigating complex systems while also managing high levels of stress. Parents of autistic children are not only supporting their child's needs, but are also dealing with emotional, financial, and systemic challenges that can impact their overall well being. So, as social workers, it's important for us to understand these stressors so we can better assess caregiver needs, provide support, and connect families to resources. This topic also highlights the role of social workers in addressing larger systemic barriers such as access to services and disparities in care, especially for low income and minority families. Throughout this presentation, I will be focusing on the learning outcomes. What is psychological distress? We'll be focusing on the problem. Why is psychological distress in parents of autistic children an issue? Sources of psychological distress in parents, barriers to diagnose and how that affects parent psychological distress. It'll go into the theoretical framework. I focus on family systems theory and the impact of psychological distress on the family system. I go into research, research-based interventions and research solutions for reduction. And then I will go into how social workers can help. And I will end with a conclusion. Going into the learning outcomes, by the end of this presentation, participants will be able to identify key sources of psychological distress experienced by parents of autistic children, explain how that distress impacts family functioning and child outcomes, and describe social work-based approaches used to support these parents. As I move through each section, I'll be connecting back to these outcomes so you can see how each part builds on to the next. So what is psychological distress? So psychological distress refers to a state of emotional suffering that can include things like anxiety, depression, and feeling overwhelmed. It usually develops when stress becomes too intense or continues over a long period of time. Unlike stress, which can sometimes be temporary or manageable, and it goes in with that distress, psychological distress tends to have a more negative impact on a person's overall well-being. It can affect how someone thinks, feels, and functions in their daily life, including their relationship and ability to cope. This is important to understand because in this presentation, we're focusing specifically on psychological distress in parents of autistic children and the factors that contribute to it. So now that we understand what psychological distress is and how it impacts families, it's important to look at why this is such a significant issue, specifically for parents of autistic children. So why is psychological distress in parents of autistic children an issue? So psychological distress in parents of autistic children is a significant issue because research shows that these parents often experience higher levels of stress, anxiety, and depression compared to parents of neurotypical children or children with other conditions. This level of distress can impact a parent's overall well-being and their ability to function day to day, which in turn affects the entire family. It can influence the quality of parent-child interactions, increase tension in relationships, and contribute to instability within the home. There's also a direct connection between caregiver well-being and child outcomes. When parents are overwhelmed or emotionally exhausted, it can affect how they respond to their children's needs and behaviors. In addition, many families face barriers such as limited access to services, financial strain, and social isolation, which can make distress worse over time. Because of these combined factors, psychological distress is not just an individual concern, it's a broader family and social issue that requires attention and support. So now we're going to talk about sources of the psychological distress. Research shows that this distress is influenced by multiple factors, including high caregiving demands, limited access to services, social isolation, stigma that's placed on the parents and the family, and financial strain. However, it's important to recognize that not all families experience these challenges in the same way. Research shows that minority and low-income families are more likely to experience delays in diagnosis, not because of lack of awareness, but because of systemic barriers. So that brings us to the barriers to diagnosis and how that affects the parent psychological distress. Mainly focuses on minority and low-income families. So research shows that minority and low-income families are likely to experience delays in getting an autism diagnosis for their child. These delays are not due to a lack of awareness, but are linked to systemic barriers such as limited access to providers, financial challenges, and delayed responses from professionals when concerns are raised. These delays can significantly impact parent psychological distress. Without a diagnosis, parents are often left feeling uncertain, questioning themselves, and struggling to access appropriate support. In addition, many families experience financial strain when attempting to seek services on their own, which further increases caregiver stress. Overall, this highlights that psychological distress in parents is not only related to caregiving demands, but it also shaped by systemic barriers within healthcare and service systems. Now that we have gone over, what psychological distress is, and what the problem is, and those barriers within that problem, I want to focus on my theoretical framework, which is family systems theory. Family systems theory originally developed by Bowen. It explains that families function as interconnected systems, meaning that when one member is affected, it impacts the entire family. This theory emphasizes that the family operates as a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, and that individual behaviors cannot be fully understood in isolation. Instead, the focus is on patterns of interaction between family members. Another key concept is circular causality, which means that behaviors within the family are ongoing and reciprocal. Rather than one person causing a problem, family members continuously influence each other through their interactions. This framework is especially helpful when understanding families of children with autism, as increased caregiving demands and external stressors can impact the entire family system. It also helps explains why parents may experience psychological distress, since their well-being is closely connected to both their child's needs and the overall functioning of the family system. Using family systems theory, we can better understand how psychological distress doesn't just affect one individual, but the entire family. Building on family systems theory, psychological distress in one family member, especially a primary caregiver, does not occur in isolation. Instead, it affects the entire family system. When a parent is experiencing high levels of distress, it can impact communication, increase conflict, and create emotional tension within the home. This may affect relationships between partners as well as between the parent and child. Children are also sensitive to these emotional dynamics, which means caregiver distress can influence their behavior, emotional regulation, and overall development. Over time, this can create a cycle where stress in the parents impact the child, and the child's needs or behaviors then increase stress in the parent. This highlights why it is so important to view psychological distress not just as an individual issue, but as something that affects the entire family system. Because of this broader impact, it becomes critical to identify interventions that support not just the child, but the caregiver and family as a whole. Research also provides insight into what can help reduce psychological distress in parents of autistic children. Potty and Ingram found that coping strategies and strong social support play a major role in improving parent well-being. When parents feel supported and have tools to manage stress, their overall functioning improves. Parent training programs are another important intervention. These programs help parents better understand their child's need and how to respond effectively, which increases confidence and reduces stress. In addition, support systems such as support groups give parents a space to connect with others who are going through similar experiences. This helps reduce feelings of isolation and provides emotional validation. These findings highlight that effective intervention should not focus only on the child, but also on supporting the caregiver, since parents' well-being directly impacts the entire family system. While system-level solutions like improving access to services are important, these research-based interventions show that supporting parents directly is also essential in reducing psychological distress. So overall, the research shows that reducing psychological distress isn't just about supporting the child, it also requires directly supporting the caregiver. With that in mind, I want to shift into how social workers can actually apply these findings in real practice. Research does highlight several key solutions. Expanding telehealth and in-home services can improve access, especially in rural areas. Increasing Medicaid and insurance coverage helps reduce financial strain. Strengthening school-based supports ensures that children receive services in accessible settings. In addition, improving culturally competent care and increasing early screening can help reduce delays in diagnosis, particularly for minority families. Overall, these solutions focus on reducing systemic barriers, which in turn can decrease that psychological distress in parents and improve outcomes for the entire family system. Okay, so building on what the research shows, social workers play a key role in putting these supports into action within a real world setting. So, one important step is assessing caregiver stress, since it directly impacts both the parent and the child's well being. Social workers also provide emotional support and psychoeducation, helping parents better understand autism and their own stress responses, which can improve coping and confidence. In addition, we connect families to resources like respite care, support groups, and community services, which help reduce isolation and caregiver burden. Beyond that individual support, it's critical to recognize systemic barriers, especially for low-income, minority, and rural families, such as limited access to providers, financial strain, and delayed diagnosis. Because of this, social workers take an active role in helping families navigate systems and access services. Advocacy is also essential, including pushing for equitable access to care and addressing disparities in underserved communities. Overall, this highlights that supporting the caregiver is not just an intervention, it is an ongoing multi-level responsibility that impacts the entire family system. In conclusion, parents of autistic children experience significant psychological distress due to both the ongoing demands of caregiving and the systemic barriers they face, such as limited access to services and delayed diagnosis. We've also seen how this distress does not just affect the parent, but impacts the entire family system, including relationships, routines, and overall functioning. Family system theory helps us understand these interconnected dynamics. Most importantly, research shows that when we support caregivers through resources, education, and emotional support, we improve outcomes not just for the parent, but for the child and the family as a whole. This highlights the critical role social workers play in not only supporting individuals, but also addressing larger systemic barriers and advocating for equitable access to services. Overall, supporting the caregiver is essential to strengthening the entire family system. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Here are my references. Thank you.